One of the things I learned immediately in architecture school, and certainly working as an architect, is that not everybody is actually interested in building buildings. A lot of people like talking about them, a lot of people like drawing them. But in order to really make a project happen, take an idea and turn it into a successful business, a successful built project that hits budgets and is an inspiring environment, you have to look at it from a different point of view, which is not usually what architects are taught, and certainly not how most architects actually work. The way that I like to say this is that I'm not interested in projects that end up dead on the desk, meaning projects that don't actually go into moving forward successfully. Because in a day and age where you can just Google what something should look like a climbing gym, or you can just ask AI to make you something that's crazy, and whether it's good or not is a different question. But making drawings, getting help with that kind of stuff isn't really the problem anymore, because there's plenty of people out there who can make a pretty picture, including the mystery of AI. So my focus, what I've realized is that the difference is that focusing on how to open doors, how to get projects open is a very different way of looking at the practice of creating businesses and building architecture and building environments for these businesses. And one of the Buckminster Fuller quotes that I really love is that when I'm thinking on a problem, I never think about beauty, but when I'm finished, if it's not beautiful, I know it's wrong. And when I was teaching design studios, I found this to be a really, really helpful quote, because it's not about saying we don't care about what something looks like. You're spending a lot of money. We need to love it. We should love it. We should want it to be beautiful. We should want it to be cool. We should want it to do all these different things. But fundamentally, if we start there, that's a problem, because it's sort of ignoring all of the other issues that need to be considered. And for Buckminster Fuller, he actually was thinking about the way we live and the way that structures were put together at a much bigger level than just the shape of a dome. And so that's a good analogy for me in terms of the way I like to look at projects, and the way that I find is successful for clients. Again, for clients, not necessarily the most fun part, but if we want to be successful, the most successful thing for all of us is to open businesses and hit budgets and hit targets and actually bring them to life for real, not just have it die on the desk. And this is why I've learned this over years, and I've really learned to sort of round out my own career, my own trajectory, my own different sort of verticals of experience and expertise, from, my core competency as an architect, as a contractor, as a teacher, but then also expanding and being able to fold in things like operational needs and zoning and permitting realities and real estate and legal and finance and doing leases and doing construction financing and raising money. Because if you don't actually have any idea about how any of that goes together, then you're doing a much smaller part of the project. And that's why, over the years, my focus has really been on not only sort of digging the ditches with clients in terms of a lot of that, but certainly also the blue sky work, meaning like making cool things and drawing it. But in reality, being able to combine these things is the way that we have to be able to look at things like finance very quickly from the start. Because otherwise, we are just simply like swimming upstream into a situation that's not going to end well for us. And I say that particularly now because over the last 5 years, in this case, showing Q1 of 2021 on the left, just the cost versus inflation, and building costs in particular, non-residential building costs have gone up at a rate almost double regular inflation, which everybody's talking about inflation. In the construction world, we're double that. So how can we not talk about it? So as an architect, that's why architecture isn't the answer. Architecture is part of the answer, but we have to balance this out and understand the investment versus the building, or what we can do on the other end, because the pieces are always sort of the same. The colors, like the dots of color, are always kind of the same, but just like a chessboard, it's about how they actually relate to each other. And just like chess, my 6-year-old, back when my kid was 4, she could set up the chessboard. That's not the problem. Knowing that we need an architect, knowing that we need a specialty vendor to make skate ramps or climbing walls or whatever. That's not the problem. The problem is in your scenario, as the game plays out, after one thing happens, what do you do next? After the next thing happens, what do you do next? After something surprises you, then what do you do? That's what experience is. That's what playing the game is. And that's what technique is all about, is about taking the pieces that are known. I love the egg analogy because it's not a lot of materials. It's not a lot of, equipment required, but the technique of doing it is what matters and what makes it either amazing or terrible. And that's exactly what this is moving through the process of mixing very known ingredients and seeing what are sort of like what it looks like when we're in the weeds, because the question very quickly also becomes like, is it good enough? Are we doing enough to like make something that isn't just checking a box? Like, how can we do something that's better? And how can we define our vision so that we're really focused on something that is great, not just something that's sort of good enough? And that is really the question of like, how do we make great projects? And one of the things that I really like about the good to great concept is that it argues that being great isn't just something that we should aspire to. It's actually really good for your business, and that it comes from disciplined people with disciplined thought and disciplined action. So we're really building up how we actually create action through discipline. And notice how it's not talking about spending more money here. It's just talking about doing it the right way. And this sort of flywheel effect is really the way that I look at design as well, where we're really taking something and sort of spinning it through the process. And I like to look at the process of creating building projects, these third place projects, in a similar way, where we're collecting ideas. There's this sort of funnel at the top of vision and mindset and goals, and the sort of shopping list and our budgeting and visualizations that are all leading into this flywheel where we're going around. We're asking those questions of what can we hold on to? What do we need to hold on to? What do we give up on? What can we replace? What can we get rid of? And as we kind of go around and around, we have this environment that we are putting in these activities and the things we love that are then creating the community out of that are creating an economic result that gets us back to the environment at the top. And as we sort of spin around, the questions change. We go from what is the sort of minimum viable thing we need to do at the start to what do we replace and what do we focus on? Meaning we're trying to get better in sort of round two. As we go around again, we're looking at the environment. We're saying, what do we replace? What do we focus on? How does that affect our activities? How does that affect our community? How does that affect the bottom line on the other end? And as we get back up again to the environment, what else can we do? What's coming next? And this idea of seasoning to taste, this idea that as we go around and around, we're actually able to sort of spice it up as much as we want. That really, to me, is what this process is collecting all of these sort of core values, these visions, these beliefs, these goals, and then spinning it and keep going until we sort of get the right degree of spiciness that we're looking for our project. And at the end of the day, like the difference between being like the best in the world at something and being like a laughing stock is often in the fractional differences that we can find at every level. So in auto racing, it's like all these different decisions about how they run the team and who the driver is and what kind of modeling and testing they do thousands of miles away. It all just adds up to fractional differences. And that to me is how we go from good to great. And one of the things in their follow-up book that I love is this idea of great by choice, as in this is a choice. This isn't something that just happens. This is something we have to choose to make happen. And the quote being, we are not imprisoned by circumstances. We're free to choose, free to become great by choice. And so to me, that's what I mean when I say my goal with clients is not to make something beautiful that's dead on a desk. It's not enough to make something that's a beautiful drawing. Again, AI can do that. We can do that on our phone now. My kids can do that. That's not the point. The point is, in your situation, how do we play the game? How do we play the game of defining our own vision, our values, our circumstances, and how do we sort of play it out? If this, then that. That's what developing a project is really about. it all seems very easy from afar. And it's always the same pieces, more or less. It's just how do we actually put them together? And then how do we go about answering questions as they come up? Refining priorities so that we can actually afford something, so that as the economics change or evolve or don't change or continue to be challenging, what do we do then? These are exactly the questions that people who've really developed projects know is the difference between doing it and not doing it. From the outside, it all kind of looks very positive and doable. And it really is, honestly. We're not launching rockets, but we do need to look at it in a different way than just making something that looks really pretty on paper, because that isn't enough to get it over the finish line. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.